The story of Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is one of the most inspiring narratives found in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. Their journey from young Jewish captives in Babylon to becoming high-ranking officials in the kingdom is a story of faithfulness, courage, and divine intervention. They stood firm in their commitment to God, despite being in a foreign land with different values, customs, and pressures to conform. Here's an explanatory journey through their lives, filled with lessons that continue to resonate today. Before we dive in, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to our channel Solid Bible Stories. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our latest videos that delve into the most fascinating stories and teachings of the Bible. Daniel was born in the land of Judah, during a time when the Israelites still lived under the shadow of their covenant with God, though many had strayed from his ways. Daniel's parents were devout, teaching him the scriptures and the commandments of Moses from a young age. In their home, the prayers and traditions of Israel were kept alive, even as political turmoil swirled around them. Though his homeland was beset with threats from surrounding nations, Daniel's childhood was marked by faith and devotion. He was an observant child, keen to learn and dedicated to the God of his fathers. His parents, aware of the gathering storm of Babylon's growing power, instilled in him a sense of hope and trust in the Almighty. When Daniel was still a young man, the armies of Babylon, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, besieged Jerusalem. The city eventually fell, and many were taken into captivity. Among those chosen for exile were Daniel, Shadrach, Hananiah, Meshach, Mishael, and Abednego, Azariah. These four were selected for their intelligence, appearance, and potential to serve in the court of the king. As they were led away from their homeland, their hearts were heavy with grief. The journey to Babylon was long and arduous, filled with moments of despair as they looked back on their beloved Jerusalem, now a shadow of its former glory. Yet, even in captivity, they kept their faith, knowing that God was with them. When they arrived in Babylon, the sight of the towering walls and magnificent structures left them in awe. The grandeur of Babylon's palaces and temples stood in stark contrast to the humble surroundings of Jerusalem. But amidst this splendor, Daniel and his friends resolved in their hearts to remain faithful to their God, no matter what trials they would face. Soon after arriving, Daniel and his friends were enrolled in the king's academy to be trained in the ways of the Babylonians. As part of their training, they were offered food and wine from the king's own table, rich and luxurious provisions meant to strengthen their bodies and minds. But Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew that this food had likely been offered to Babylonian idols, and to eat it would defile them according to the law of their God. In a quiet act of rebellion, Daniel approached the chief official, Ashpenaz, and requested that they be allowed to eat only vegetables and drink water. Ashpenaz hesitated, fearing that the four young men would grow weak and frail without the king's food. But Daniel insisted. "Test us for 10 days," Daniel said, "and see if we are not healthier than the others." Reluctantly, Ashpenaz agreed. After 10 days, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego appeared stronger and healthier than all the other young men who had eaten the royal food. Ashpenaz was astonished, and from that day forward they were allowed to continue their diet, remaining faithful to God even in a foreign land. As the years passed, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego excelled in their studies. They learned the language, literature, and sciences of the Babylonians, but they never forgot their roots. Day by day, they grew in wisdom, and soon their reputation for insight and understanding spread throughout the royal court. King Nebuchadnezzar himself took notice of them. In his eyes, these young men were different, set apart by their knowledge and their demeanor. They carried themselves with a quiet dignity, and their counsel was sought after by the king and his advisers. But it wasn't just their wisdom that set them apart. It was their unwavering faith. In everything, Daniel and his friends sought the will of God, and in return, the Lord granted them favor in the eyes of the king. Yet even as they rose to prominence in the Babylonian court, a greater trial was looming, one that would test not just their wisdom, but their very lives. One night, King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that troubled him deeply. In his dream, he saw a colossal statue made of different metals. The head was of gold, the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of bronze, the legs of iron, and the feet were a mixture of iron and clay. Then a stone not cut by human hands struck the statue, shattering it into pieces. The wind blew the fragments away, leaving nothing behind, and the stone grew into a great mountain that filled the earth. The king awoke, his heart filled with dread, but he couldn't understand the meaning of the dream. He summoned his wise men and demanded that they not only interpret the dream, but also tell him what the dream was. None could fulfill his request, and in a fit of rage, Nebuchadnezzar ordered all the wise men in Babylon to be executed. When Daniel heard of the king's decree, he went to the Lord in prayer. That night, God revealed the mystery of the dream to Daniel in a vision. The next day, Daniel went before the king and, with great humility, said, "No wise man or magician can explain this mystery to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries." Daniel then recounted the dream to Nebuchadnezzar and explained its meaning. "The statue represents the kingdoms of the earth," he said. "You, O king, are the head of gold. After you will come another kingdom, then another, and yet another, each one inferior to the one before. But in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. This is the kingdom represented by the stone, and it will endure forever." King Nebuchadnezzar was astounded. He fell prostrate before Daniel and declared, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings." The king honored Daniel and appointed him ruler over the province of Babylon and chief among the wise men. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were also given positions of authority, and the favor of God continued to rest upon them. As time passed, King Nebuchadnezzar's pride grew, and he decided to build a massive golden statue, 90 feet high, on the plain of Dura. He summoned all the leaders of Babylon to the dedication of the statue and commanded that when the music played, everyone must bow down and worship it. Anyone who refused would be thrown into a blazing furnace. When the music played, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood tall, refusing to bow. Their refusal was reported to the king, and in his fury he summoned them to appear before him. "Is it true that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up?" he demanded. The three men replied calmly, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Nebuchadnezzar's face contorted with rage at the defiance of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded the strongest soldiers in his army to bind the 3 men and throw them into the fire. The furnace roared with such intensity that the flames leapt out and consumed the soldiers as they approached, but the 3 faithful men were cast into the fiery blaze. Inside the furnace, something miraculous happened. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood amidst the flames, untouched and unharmed. Their clothes were not singed, nor were their bodies burned. The fire, though furious, had no power over them. And there, in the midst of the furnace, a 4th figure appeared, a being of divine presence, whose radiance was unlike anything Nebuchadnezzar had ever seen. The king, watching from a safe distance, was astounded. He leapt to his feet and exclaimed to his advisers, Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" "Yes, your majesty," they replied. "But look," the king shouted, his voice trembling with awe. "I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar approached the opening of the furnace and called out, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." With calm and steady steps, the 3 men emerged from the furnace. The crowd gasped in disbelief as they saw that not a hair on their heads was singed, and their robes were completely intact. There wasn't even the smell of fire on them. Nebuchadnezzar stood speechless for a moment, his eyes wide with awe. Then, in front of all his advisers and officials, he declared, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied my command. They were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own." The king's decree spread across the land, and from that day forward, anyone who spoke against the God of Israel would be severely punished. Nebuchadnezzar acknowledged that no other god could save in such a way, and he promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions within Babylon. Though they remained in exile, the 3 men never wavered in their devotion to God. Their faith had been tested in the furnace, and they had emerged stronger than ever, their lives a testimony to the power and faithfulness of the God of Israel. In the years that followed, Daniel continued to rise in prominence. His wisdom and insight earned him a position of great influence within the Babylonian court, and he became known not just as an interpreter of dreams, but as a man deeply connected to the divine. His reputation spread across the empire, and many sought his counsel in matters of governance, law, and even spiritual guidance. Yet Daniel's heart remained humble. He never sought power for its own sake, and his loyalty to God was unwavering. In every decision he sought the wisdom of the Lord, and because of this, God continued to bless him with favor in the eyes of kings and rulers. When King Nebuchadnezzar eventually died, his kingdom passed through various rulers, but Daniel's position remained secure. Under King Belshazzar, the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel continued to serve faithfully. However, another test of his faith was soon approaching, one that would shake the very foundations of the Babylonian Empire. One fateful night, King Belshazzar hosted a grand banquet for 1,000 of his nobles. In a display of arrogance and sacrilege, he ordered that the gold and silver goblets taken from the temple in Jerusalem be brought out so that he and his guests could drink from them. As they drank and praised the gods of gold and silver, the mood in the banquet hall was festive, filled with laughter and revelry. But in the midst of the celebration, something strange and terrifying occurred. A hand, disembodied and glowing, appeared before the king and began writing on the wall of the palace. The room fell silent as everyone stared in horror at the mysterious hand, watching it carve out unfamiliar words into the plaster. King Belshazzar's face turned pale, his legs grew weak, and he trembled with fear. None of the wise men in his court could decipher the writing, and panic spread throughout the hall. In desperation, the king called for Daniel, knowing that his wisdom and connection to the divine might offer an answer. When Daniel arrived, the king promised him riches and high honors if he could interpret the writing. But Daniel, unperturbed by the offer, said, "You may keep your gifts for yourself, or give them to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means." Daniel then turned his gaze to the writing on the wall. "The words are Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin," he said, "and this is what they mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Parsin, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Though Belshazzar rewarded Daniel as he promised, the king's fate was sealed. That very night the Medes and Persians invaded Babylon, and Belshazzar was slain. The mighty Babylonian Empire fell, and a new kingdom took its place. After the fall of Babylon, the new ruler, King Darius of the Medes, appointed Daniel in his 50s as one of 3 administrators over the kingdom. Daniel's exceptional abilities soon distinguished him from the others, and King Darius considered placing him in charge of the entire realm. This favoritism stirred jealousy among the other officials, who sought to find some fault in Daniel. But because Daniel was blameless in all his conduct, they could find no grounds for accusation, except in his faith. Knowing that Daniel prayed to his God 3 times a day, the officials devised a cunning plan. They persuaded King Darius to issue a royal decree that for 30 days no one in the kingdom could pray to any god or man except the king. Anyone who disobeyed the decree would be thrown into the lion's den. When Daniel heard of the decree, he did not waver in his devotion. As was his custom, he went to his upper room, opened the windows facing Jerusalem, and prayed to God, too, giving thanks and asking for guidance. His enemies, watching closely, quickly reported his actions to the king. Though Darius was fond of Daniel and regretted the decree, he could not revoke it according to the laws of the Medes and Persians. Reluctantly, the king ordered that Daniel be thrown into the lion's den. Before Daniel was cast into the pit, Darius said, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." That night, King Darius was filled with anxiety. He refused to eat or sleep, pacing back and forth in his palace. At the first light of dawn, he rushed to the lion's den and called out, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" A moment of silence passed, and then Daniel's calm voice echoed from the den. "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." Overwhelmed with joy, Darius ordered that Daniel be lifted out of the den. Not a scratch was found on him, for he had trusted in his God. The king then commanded that those who had conspired against Daniel be thrown into the lion's den, and before they even reached the floor, the lions overpowered them. King Darius, deeply moved by the miracle he had witnessed, issued a new decree to all the peoples and nations in his kingdom. "I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed, and his dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." Daniel continued to prosper during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Though his life had been filled with trials, Daniel remained steadfast in his faith, and through his unwavering trust in God, he became a beacon of hope for his people. The lives of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego provide powerful lessons about faith, courage, and integrity. Their unwavering commitment to God, even in the face of death, stands as an example for all believers. They remained faithful to God in small and great matters, trusting Him completely in times of crisis. They were willing to risk their lives rather than compromise their faith, and in return God's presence was with them in their trials, demonstrating His power and glory. Through their stories, we are reminded that God is sovereign, able to deliver, and worthy of our complete trust and devotion. Please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and watch other videos. Thanks for watching.